Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I bring you founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, you name it, across the world of crypto and blockchain. And today I have another amazing guest. I always have amazing guests, and I always learn new things. My guest today is the CEO and co-founder of Lao Network. His name is Alun Evans. Alun, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah.
Very welcome. Pleasure to have you here. So let's kick things off. And the first question is, I always ask everybody is, what is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
It's a good first question. Yeah, a nice one to lead with. So yeah, my name is Alan. I'm from the UK originally. Many years ago, I did my PhD in physics, in medical physics, and what interested me of that work was actually 3D stuff, so 3D graphics. So I was doing a lot of work with 3D graphics and the physics of that. And that led me to sort of turn my attention to the video game industry and things like that. And maybe about 15 years ago, I moved from my home country of the UK to Barcelona in Spain. And there I met a gentleman called Tony Mateos, who's one of the co-founders of the Laos Network. And we became friends and we were colleagues working. His specialty is audio in particular originally, and the physics of audio. And we started working together and we worked together for a few years and then we went our separate ways. We founded some companies. I made a video game or two. Tony actually went away and founded a company called ImSound, which was later acquired by Dolby. And that technology that he created then became what's known as Dolby Atmos, right? Which is the 3D audio for cinemas and beyond now, which he's just actually won an Oscar for just last week. So he's quite excited about that. And then in about 2018, Tony sent me a ping and said, Alan, I've got this great idea. And when somebody with 30 patents to his name comes at you with a good idea, you tend to accept the coffee. So I sat down and Tony told me that he'd fallen in love with the blockchain. And I had to hold my hands up and said that, at that time, I, of course, had heard of the blockchain, but I wasn't really, I knew more or less how it worked, but I wasn't a super engaged with it at the time. But the more Tony explained the possibilities behind what you could do with blockchain technology, the more I realized that this really is felt like the internet was before it became big, in the mid to late 90s. And I thought, wow, this is something that could actually really change how society deals with the concept of what we own digitally. And so at that time, I was just coming out of another startup that I founded, again, in the 3D world, 3D graphics world. And so I turned my attention to blockchain and fell in love with this concept of digital ownership, in particular, what it means to own something digital. So in 2019, we founded a company called Freeverse. And Freeverse was initially a games company. That was my initial sort of road into it. It was a gaming company. And we thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could have a game where you could trade the assets of your game? So, it might be a free-to-play game where you buy things with microtransactions, but instead of just buying these things and holding them and maybe trading them for soft currency or in-game currency, wouldn't it be cool if you could actually buy and sell those things for real money? And we actually went away and built that game, and it was a moderate success. It did quite well. But again, in the technology we developed to make that possible, we realized that actually it'd be more interesting if we could open that up to other game developers and other brands who were interested in engaging with digital ownership generally. So Freeverse as a company, we pivoted from being a games company to being more of a platform. We created our own layer. We created a specialized layer 2 that was very focused on digital ownerships, and we created a whole platform and API for that to work. And about a year ago, we realized that there'll be perhaps we'd fit better in with what the market wants if we dropped down a layer and focused solely on becoming infrastructure. And so over a year ago now, we started working on what's now become Laos Network. And the Laos Network is again, it's an infrastructure blockchain focused on very much on digital ownerships and, more importantly, connectivity with other blockchains. And that's where we are right now. That's the story so far, as it were.
Sounds good. So I traveled a little bit in Southeast Asia, and everybody called the country Lao. They call it Lao, right? So I
Yeah,
pronounced at the beginning. You pronounce Laos. It doesn't like it isn't. It's not the country, but it's a company.
correct.
Or network. So what is it all about? How do you help game developers, create dynamic assets across any uh, EVM chain?
Yeah, so just on the name to start off with, there is no affiliation between Laos Network and the Laos Foundation in Switzerland with the country. It's a purely coincidental name. Funnily enough, Laos came about. The original name Laos came about because what Freebus's previous layer two, so the company that's building Laos is Freebus, right? Even though Laos is an independent foundation. Freebus's previous product was a layer two, and it very much focused on dynamic NFTs, right? So NFTs that could evolve and change based on how they are used, which makes a lot of sense, particularly in the gaming field, but also in other fields. And we at the time called dynamic NFTs living assets because they had a life and they could evolve and change. And so the original plan for Laos, the working title for Laos, the layer one that we're launching in the next few weeks, was the living assets open system, right? But however, Laos now does a lot more than just dynamic NFTs. So we've kind of ditched that. It's not an acronym; it's a abbreviation. We've kind of ditched that now. But when we were thinking of a new name for the chain, we couldn't really come up with a better one than Laos. It sounds like adventure and interesting stuff, right? And so there is the link with the country is purely incidental. And so Laos, the vision of Laos is to really drive interoperability between chains. Yeah. So one thing we noticed was that even during the bear market in the last couple of years, around about 20% of transactions on Ethereum and Polygon were minting transactions, people that were minting assets, like mostly ERC-71s, but also ERC-1155s and things like that. And they are paying a lot of gas. If you're creating many, many tokens in Ethereum, you're paying tens of thousands of dollars equivalent in gas. And even in Polygon, which obviously scales Ethereum, you're still, if you want to mint many tokens, then the gas fees are very high. And we thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could create a system that would essentially enable offloading that minting cost away from those mature chains while still maintaining the ownership and the trading and the staking and the lending and the sending of all those assets in the existing chains. So what we don't want to do is in inverted commas, steal transactions away from those mature chains. We just want to help them offload their minting costs and then maintain the ownership. So the trading still happens. So the gas fees are still being paid in ETH, for example, for trading. But the actual minting of the assets happens on Laos. So the technology we developed is essentially a way of connecting multiple chains, solely focused on the concept of minting assets and offloading those minting costs onto Laos, which, because it's focused on one thing and one thing only, does it much, much faster and much cheaper. And therefore, if you're a builder who wants to create many assets, whether it's in a video game or whether real world assets, or whether you want to create an NFT collection, for example, and you don't want to pay those high gas costs, but you want to stay in that mature ecosystem, you want to have your assets in OpenSea or Rarible, whatever other marketplace you use, you can do that, and you can essentially offload those minting costs onto Laos. And that was kind of the vision we have with Laos. And as an addition, we have the dynamic NFT still in there as well. So the living assets component is still there to a certain extent.
I keep seeing Ethereum people on Twitter X say the blobs are coming, which means there's some kind of upgrade called Delcoon or something this week. Is that gonna impact you at all?
Sure. I mean, the Denkim upgrade is great, and I think it is going to have some impact on gas costs on Ethereum, and that's wonderful because they're ridiculous right now. They're frankly ridiculous, the gas costs. And don't forget, we are still technically coming out of a bear market. We're not even entering the bull market again. I really worry to think what the gas costs will be on Ethereum when we go into a full bear market. We've seen now Bitcoin hitting a new record just today, right? Many other token prices are going up very quickly. And so that's only going to make things more expensive. So I absolutely think it's a great thing that we're going to have the Denkim upgrade and Ethereum is going to get cheaper. I think it's great that we have all these layer twos that are accelerating Ethereum in general with whatever technology we're using, whether it's rollups, whether it's zero knowledge, whatever it is. I think they're all great, and I want them all to succeed, and I want Laos to be helping them, further reduce the costs for builders and for users. And because ultimately it comes down to that, because even if Ethereum halves in price or a quarters in price, if you want to mint 10,000 assets on Ethereum, you're going to pay a lot of money to do so, right? And I think that's where Laos comes in.
Awesome. So I want to find out. So your focus, one of your focuses is Web3 gaming, right?
That's right.
I want to find out, the current lay of the land, and then the future role of real world asset tokenization in the Web3 gaming world.
So let's separate gaming and real world asset tokenizations, because I think they're two really super interesting use cases. In the gaming world, our vision when we founded Freeverse 5 years ago was this vision of allowing gamers to buy and sell assets for real money amongst themselves. And we now, let's say we now have the technology for that to happen. What's happened is a lot of the initial, or many of the initial use cases for that technology have been essentially speculative in nature. So we had the NFT boom a couple of years ago. The NFT boom was mostly driven by speculation, people buying, inverted commas, rare items with the intention of selling them on later on. And that spilled over into the gaming world. And a lot of people were planning on building that speculation into the gaming world, but it turns out that gamers don't want to speculate. They don't want to manage their portfolio. They want to have fun and play a game, right? And as a result, the gaming world has turned, in general, very strongly against blockchain NFTs for very understandable reasons. What I would say, though, is that there are many advantages to using that technology if you separate speculation away from it. If you, for example, tell a gamer who has invested many hours and many dollars in a particular game that they could sell certain assets and somehow recuperate some of those dollars, and in fact reward the time and investment they put into that game, rather than just because they've collected something rare, then I think most would be interested. Likewise, if you asked a gamer if they could take one asset from one game and use it in a different one, a completely different one. Let's imagine you have a football player in a football game, and you could suddenly import that football player into a basketball game. Then they'd probably be interested in doing that as well, right? And so those kind of use cases are enabled by Web3 technology. And I think those are the use cases that the Web3 gaming community needs to really turn towards in order to drive the adoption. You present the positive use cases to the gaming community in a way that makes sense to them for what they want to do. So I think in terms of gaming, that's probably where we need to move to. We need to move away from speculation and more towards real world utility, or let me say the real world's a wrong word, more towards utility. And then to the second part of your question about real world asset tokenization, I think there's a huge potential market here. I think if we are at the beginning of a bull market, there is the potential that many things will be tokenized. And if you think about it, there are many categories of real world things that make sense to appear on the blockchain, right? Just taking an example at random, you have invoices, right? When I issue you an invoice, or you issue me an invoice for work done, it doesn't have to be on the blockchain. It's just a bit of paper or a PDF that's sent via email. But does it make sense to have a permanent record so that you can prove that that invoice has been sent? Well, yes, it does, right? Because then no one can argue the fact that invoice has been sent. If I pay that invoice, does it make sense that there is a permanent record of the fact that I have paid the invoice and you have accepted it? Yes, it does, because in a court of law, if anyone has any doubt about it, they can go and look at the blockchain transactions, and it's the proof, right? And so whether it's invoices, whether it's certificates, whether it's bills of lading in the shipping industry, whether it's music rights. All of these things, I think they don't have to be on the blockchain, but there are many benefits from them being tokenized on the blockchain. And so I think one of the blocks to that use case, those use cases being developed, is the fact that you're not going to mint an invoice on Ethereum if it costs you $100 to do so, right? If it's more than the value of the invoice. But if it costs you a few cents to do so, then maybe it makes sense that you do that, right? So I think in the real world asset space, so far we've just seen very high value assets being tokenized, such as real estate. There's been quite a lot of movement in real estate recently. And we haven't yet seen so much movement into tokenization of less high value items, such as, for example, invoices. But the reason we haven't seen that is because it's been too expensive. And those two use cases separately, gaming and minting at scale in games, and also real world assets and minting at scale for assets that need to have many or need to be very numerous in their scale. Those are the two use cases that allows us focusing on.
Said the magic word there that I want to dive into a little bit further. You said speculation. You also said gamers are against blockchain, or like knowing that they're, it's interesting because in order to advance and to move forward, we have to add new functionality, right, to existing NFTs, to in-game collectible assets, from both the content perspective and from a technology perspective, right? So how do you do that? How do you add that evolution of technology to both NFTs and in-game collectibles?
I think what you have to do is remove the word collectibles, right? Collectibles inherently suggests rarity and scarcity, and those two words lead almost inevitably to speculation and market speculation, and those are the things that the traditional gamer is not particularly so interested in. And that's not just my opinion, that's just a truth that we've seen with the general backlash that the gaming community has had towards the NFT market so far. And as I said, I do understand that backlash in the sense that gamers don't want to be worried about how valuable their collectibles are. They want to be playing the game. So an alternative use case there is to remove the word collectibles and just call them tradable assets, right? So let's have a concrete use case. In the game that we actually developed 5 years ago in 2019, it was a sports management game. It was a football game, football in the European sense of the word rather than the American sense of the word, right? So soccer for our American friends. And when you started the game, you were given a team of 18 players. And those are the players you used, and you managed them, and you played in matches against other users. It was a multiplayer game. And what you didn't realize when you logged into the game is that those 18 players on your team were actually NFTs. They were all NFTs. And you never realized until the opportunity presented itself that you could actually trade them to other people, right? And you could trade them for real money, not for in-game currency, but for something that had a value. And so that, to me, makes that example is an example of the use case that's beyond collectibles and scarcity. Because what you could do with your players is train them and make them fitter and faster and score more goals and make more tackles and run further and so on, and get injured less often. So by training them, you were improving them, and therefore the value that they had on the marketplace was not based on how rare they were or how collectible they were. It was based on how well you had played the game. And so you're inverting completely the motivation for trading those assets and wanting to buy those assets. You're turning it from being a reward for effort as opposed to a simple rush to grab a collectible when it comes out.
I like it. I like the concept. I wish I could do that for some of the baseball and football game. Like, we have my kids play that I play sometimes. That'd be pretty cool. The other thing, I want to stay on that speculation. Before I want to get into inscriptions, but before I do that, I want to talk about speculation further. You said we're headed into a bull market right now, right? And
Potentially. I said maybe. We might be at the beginnings of one, I said.
yeah, we might be. I think so too. But what I see is I see a lot of speculation. I see a lot of so many meme coins that have no utility, right? But do they have utility? Like, are you securing the underlying network by buying that? And if so, where's the value at, and what's the potential to be able to turn these meme coins that have no utility into something that could have utility?
So in any market, you're going to have speculation in one way or another, probably. Maybe not 100% certain, but probably. And even in the example I mentioned earlier on, where the value of the token is based on how it's being used, even then there is going to be an element of speculation, whether it's a small element, but it still might be an element of speculation. And the crypto market, of course, is traditionally has been full of speculation. In fact, you could argue that the majority of the crypto market, not the blockchain market, but the crypto market in particular, is based on speculation. And why do people start a meme coin? Well, it's to make money through speculation, ultimately, right? Is there a potential for a meme coin to become useful in the future? Well, if you can use that meme coin as a currency somewhere else, then perhaps there is. But I think we'd all agree that people aren't starting meme coins for them to become general currencies you can buy your groceries with. They're starting meme coins because they want the value to go up and to make money out of it, which is fine. Speculation is going to happen. Speculation is going to exist. And also, I think collectability will happen, right? We talk about digital collectibles frequently we forget about the fact that people collect things in the real world as well, right? People collect stamps and trading cards and guitars and cars and all that stuff in the real world, and there is speculation on the price of those too, right? So it's just that in the crypto or in the digital world, it's perhaps slightly easier to create a rare collection of things than it is in the real world, but that people do like to speculate and trade and collect things. So I don't think, even though we've seen, and we're perhaps at the start of bull run, as you said, and even though there is going to be more speculation, I don't think it's going to go away, but neither do I think it's the end goal for blockchain technology as a whole. And that's something that I very fervently believe in, is that blockchain is and should be much more than just speculation.
I agree with you. We're in the same boat here.
Great.
So, yeah. So let me ask you. Let's move to inscriptions then. The good, the bad, and the ugly. What are the good, the bad, and the ugly of inscriptions, and why is a bridgeless minting a better alternative?
So let's talk about what inscriptions really are first, to make sure that we all understand. So an inscription is a way of adding some data in the call data of a transaction. So any transaction can optionally have some text, if you like, added to it. And that text can be anything you want. And an inscription is essentially a way of you writing some text that has some meaning, and you send a transaction to yourself, or it could be to anybody else, but you use it to yourself. And then that transaction, the text of that transaction, appears on the blockchain. Great, wonderful. The good thing about that is that you are not actually minting a new asset on the blockchain. You're creating a transaction, kind of a null transaction, but the data that you want appears in that transaction, therefore appears on chain, and so people can see it. And doing that is much, much cheaper than minting an asset, right? So if you want to mint a traditional NFT, as I said, on Ethereum, it's going to cost you $100, right, to interact with an ERC-71 smart contract. Whereas with an inscription, it's much, much cheaper because you're just creating a simple transaction and you're storing that data. So that's great. So inscriptions are good in that sense. What's bad about inscriptions is that the ownership of the thing that you have minted is not verified on chain, and in fact the chain doesn't know really anything about what you've minted. In fact, to actually understand the inscription itself, you have to rely on what are called indexes, so completely off-chain servers or or entities, if you like, who are reading the transactions that are being created and are indexing them and making them available on some third-party websites, right? So, I mean, technically, anyone who goes and reads all the transactions can recreate the state of whatever token is being minted. But, 99% of people, if not more, rely on these off-chain indexes, right? And it relies on those indexes following the rules that have been set out in terms of the structure of whatever text you put there. And so I feel that as much as inscriptions have been great at reducing costs for minting assets in inverted commas, to me they also feel like a bit of a step backwards, because the whole purpose of Ethereum and the Ethereum virtual machine, it was designed to have smart contract logic, and inscriptions move all of that computation off the chain, right? So a smart contract cannot interact with that inscription. And so it feels to me like a bit of a step backwards. That's the bad side of it, right? And the ugly side of it is that because people have been spamming inscriptions, it's almost highlighted the need for better scalable solutions. Because if you spam inscriptions, you're congesting the network. I think I'm right in saying that Arbitrum was taken down because of inscriptions. Avalanche wasn't taken down, but went very, very slow for a while. ZK Sync went very slow for a while. Even Polygon was quite heavily affected by it as well. And so by all these people trying to mint inscriptions very quickly, you're almost highlighting one of the problems, which is what's led to them being created, which is that these chains can't actually handle the volume of traffic that's required. So what we're coming to it with from Laos is to say, well, okay, wouldn't it be cool, instead of having inscriptions, you could actually mint an asset on the chain that can interact with smart contract logic, and can be validated, the ownership can be validated. You're not relying on some third party website that you've never heard of perhaps, or you don't know, you can't be sure that it's following the protocol correctly. You can't be sure that it's reading the inscription data correctly. You're just kind of trusting. And the whole point about blockchain is that it's trustless. So with Laos Network, what we're doing is we've come up with this solution called bridgeless minting. And so what bridgeless minting means is that you essentially mint an NFT or an asset on Ethereum or another EVM chain, and eventually potentially any other chain you like. And that asset points to an equivalent asset in Laos, right? So essentially what you've done is you've not spent any gas on Ethereum to mint that asset. You've only spent gas in Laos tokens, which, as I've said, because Laos is very focused on one thing, it's not trying to be all things to everybody, it's focused on minting of assets. It means it's very fast at doing that, and it means it's very cheap at doing that. And so you paid, cents, in less than cents, fractions of cents to mint your token, and yet that asset appears on Ethereum because the smart contract that it's linked to is on Ethereum, it's deployed on Ethereum. Anyone can read that smart contract. The asset appears on OpenSea natively. It can appear on any marketplace you want. The trading happens in ETH, or if it's on Polygon, it happens in Matic, or if it's on whatever other chain it is, it happens on the native token of that chain. And so everything regarding the ownership of that token happens in the ecosystem, the mature ecosystem. The only thing that happens away from that is the minting of that asset. And we've done that in a very clever pattern. We call it a bridgeless pattern. And if people want to find out how to see it, then I do urge them to go to our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search Laos Network, you'll find a couple of very easy to understand videos of the technological way that we've managed to link these two things.
See, I completely understand that, because I was an efficiency guy, developer at, in SQL Shop. So I would take out of the code and put it into mapping tables and have things read really quickly. And so I get that. I think it's a great idea. I love to see it. Love to see people thinking efficiently.
Actually, funnily enough, we're in testnet right now, and you can actually go and try it out. So if you go to our webpage, laosnetwork.io, and you follow the link to try bridgeless minting, you can actually go right now and you can mint an asset on Ethereum in the public collection we have on Ethereum. Because we're in testnet, we'll sling some test tokens to you from the faucet, and you can mint thousands of assets on Ethereum, and they'll appear in OpenSea, and you can trade them, and you can do whatever you want. So, obviously we're in testnet, so these assets have no value right now, and they'll probably be deleted, right? But when we go live, that exact same functionality will transfer over to mainnet. That will happen probably in May this year. We're going to mainnet, I would imagine. And so, but exactly the same technology, exactly the same flow will happen there. And in fact, many members of our community have been minting some really beautiful assets that have been put for sale, or not put for sale. Sorry, they've been minted. They appear on OpenSea, and you can see them. And yeah, it's great to see that people are beginning to engage with that technology already.
I think I'm going to have to take you up on that. So, thank you. So we talked about gamers. We talked about speculators, right? Let's talk about developers, right? So, what remains some of the developer challenges in the collectible / gaming / NFT Web3 space? You know, what challenges remain, and how can they be solved?
That's a good question, and it's a very wide question, because as a developer, there are many challenges. Because there are people who develop blockchain applications, right? Decentralized applications, but all of those applications need to have some sort of purpose, right? And it's true that many dApps so far have been finance-based dApps, whether they're to do with exchanging of tokens or staking or things like that, right? Which is great. And I think now we're beginning to see a lot more dApps that are targeting other areas. We're seeing games, right? We're seeing apps that are coming into ownership, whether it's in the metaverse or digital ownership, things like that. But I think one thing we're going to see a lot more of is, rather than developers creating a decentralized application, I think we're going to see more and more developers from other fields looking to integrate some form of decentralized practice and some sort of decentralized integration within their existing applications, whether they're games, or whether they're social media networks, or whether they're whatever software as a service, of which there are millions of different services in the world, whether they're actual applications you run on your phone or your computer for whatever purpose. I think we're going to see many, many more of those dipping their toe into the water to try and get the benefits of blockchain immutability, verified digital ownership of real goods, digital identity. I think that's quite a big one in the future as well, decentralized identity. And the challenges for them is they know nothing about blockchain development, right? And blockchain development is its own world, right? It's a completely separate thing. So I think we're going to see a big rise of we are already seeing a big rise of companies that are offering APIs and SDKs that offer a sort of smoother way in for those developers. In fact, at the Laos network, we were already partnering with a few of those such APIs and SDKs, which we'll announce on launch, which help game developers and other developers make it easier to integrate with Laos and blockchain technology in general. And then the final thing that I think is worth mentioning from a developer point of view is the user experience of engaging with blockchain. Those of us who are familiar with the blockchain and the crypto space think nothing of opening up MetaMask or Talisman or whatever, or our ledger, and plugging our ledger in and doing whatever we want. It becomes a second nature to us, and signing transactions. But the majority of the people who have no experience of blockchain and digital verified ownership, let's say, don't know what a wallet is, right? And so how do you make that soft intro to people? And I think that's less of a developer problem. It's more of a user experience problem. But I do think it's a major issue, how we get over that, and how we, as a community, we manage to convey the importance of not your keys and not your wallet and all that, or not your keys or your coins, sorry, and things like this. So I think that's one of the major challenges that we'll be facing in the next few years. But I think a lot of people are working on it. A lot of clever people are working on it, and so I think we'll get there.
Sounds good. I hope so. So you said, I'll go back a little bit. Something you said we shouldn't call them digital collectibles anymore. We should call them tradable assets, right? But you also you created I think it was a blogger, a report, or wrote something regarding important rules for those tradable assets going forward. What are some of those important rules that we should follow?
Well, I think we should separate between, distinguish between tradable assets and digital collectibles. So collectibles are tradable, That's true, but not necessarily every tradable asset should be necessarily collectible. Yeah. Think, for example, going back to my example of the football player, right? Just because that football player is tradable, they might not be collectible. In fact, given that in that particular example, we were gifting 18 new players, tradable assets to every new user of the game, inherently they weren't collectible because to start off with, because there were just so many of them, right? So you're separating from the ability to trade an asset separates it from the fact that it's a collectible or not. I think when it comes to sort of setting out ground rules, you need to be very careful. You need to make sure you're avoiding falling into traps that have plagued other games and other applications in the past that have enabled real world trading. And so a very good use case here is to go back a decade or so, however long ago it was, to when Blizzard launched real world trading in Diablo 3. And they did so without thinking through the ramifications initially. And what happened is that basically the game got taken over by farmers, right? So people would come in, they would try and farm as many assets as possible to try and sell those legally to players of the game, real players of the game. And what that meant is that essentially the game was taken over by people farming and not enough by people playing and having fun. Right. And so, these things like avoiding farming, you need to avoid an outflow of your economy as well. You want to make sure that there is enough influx of money into the economy so that it doesn't, that is not dwarfed by the outflow of money in your economy. Otherwise, the value of your economy is going to disappear very quickly as well. And so, there are a couple of rules actually at Freeverse. A couple of years ago, we published a white paper that sort of explained a few of those rules about how, as a game developer in particular, you could make sure that you are avoiding those traps that we know exist if you don't go in the right direction. And that's all to do with basically trying to you want to avoid, again, going back to what we talked earlier on, you want to avoid speculation, right? You want to avoid people speculating. You want people to be buying and selling, and the value of the assets to be based on the effort that the person has made with that asset, rather than just the how rare it is.
Makes sense to me. Sounds good. So, I want to thank you very much for your time today. I really enjoyed speaking with you. The time flew by, so appreciate it. I have one last question for you. It's probably the easiest one. How can people find out more information about the Laos Network, about you? How can they get involved? How can they participate and join your community? How can they use your technology? Any of that?
So thank you. Yes. So please go to Twitter and follow us on Laos Network, all one word. Our community is growing crazy at the moment. Just a few weeks ago, we had 200 followers on Twitter. Now we have, tens of thousands, which is great. Our Discord is very similar. It's very active. You can go and you can find all those links to do that if you go to our website, laosnetwork.io. You can find all the links there, and not only join our community and participate in our upcoming token launch, which will be happening probably in May. So we're very excited about that. But furthermore, you can also follow the main button on that page to try out bridgeless minting, and you can mint an asset on Ethereum or Polygon without paying any ETH or Matic. And that asset will appear on OpenSea, and you can see it there, and you can do whatever you want with it. You can import it into your MetaMask and stuff. And we'll have quite a lot of interesting partnerships coming up. So if you do follow us there, you'll be able to see how Laos is being used and how it's generating value, and how the token is being used to generate utility, which is the most important thing for us.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. I appreciate it.